Alright, now the work begins. So I find when you're doing this, it's really critical to try to cut the skin from underneath without cutting through the hair, because as soon as you cut through the hair, you end up with cut hair all over the meat. But if you come in underneath and you're careful, then what happens is the knife doesn't cut any of the hairs, and you can kind of part them aside while you're working, and you have all clean meat to work with there. So I'm just being super careful with this. This is a pretty nice bear hide, and it, I think, only has the one hole in it. And I might like to tan this hide. And a wise trapper once told me that everybody tans two bears, their first bear and their last bear, which happens to be the same bear. What he's getting at is that it's a pretty big undertaking. So I'm trying to front load most of my work. I'm kind of all thumbs when it comes to skinning a clean hide, and literally just peeling skin and then pushing the skin off of the tissue that's holding it onto the fat and the muscles. What I use my knife for is working around on the ankles here, but most of the rest of it I'm going to try and peel down with my thumbs. And you'll see, if you've done this before with a knife skinning, I'll show you when I've got more of it peeled back, that you're left with a very, very clean skin. Not a lot of fat or tissue on it. Alright. About an hour and a half into this bear, mostly just using my hands and then my knife for some of the difficult spots around the ankles. I think this is the hardest part of the bear because there's lots of little attachment points around the leg. The tail was really hard to get off. I had to use my knife for most of the tail. And now most of the hide is about halfway off the bear, and you can use the weight of the hide and pull on it, and you can just get your thumb in at the crease and just start pushing, and most of the hide should separate fairly easily. Now there's a really tricky part here along the edge of the ribs and the thigh, and you get this really thin bit of twitching muscle. I don't know if that's what it actually is. That's what I call it. I think it's like something they flex to twitch their side hide, and that part's really difficult to separate from the skin. So I'm going to do the best job that I can, and then it'll have to come off on a fleshing beam. So I know the light's not great in here, but just pulling, pushing with the thumbs, the edge. And I don't know if you've done a bear or a deer before, but you'll notice there are no knife marks on this hide anywhere. And if you want to keep the hide and do something with it, you really have to be careful with it. So you can do it with a knife, but knives will cut through, and they'll cut through the skin. Your thumbs cannot cut through the skin. And so if you go all the way around and you just kind of peel the skin from the tissue with your thumbs, you're going to end up with a really, really clean hide. So there's just a little bit of fat on here to scrape off. If I don't get it too dirty on the floor, I'll probably keep that to render. But because of the technique I'm using, most of the fat is still on this bear. And most of that fat, I'm going to try and peel it off to render, and then leave relatively lean cuts of meat. Relative because it's a bear, and there's no lean part of the bear, I don't think, for eating. So here's the hide. And what I did is I peeled it down as far as I could, and then when I got to the last joint at the base of the skull, I severed it with my knife and brought it outside to finish skinning it. So you can see I was able to keep the nose on and the ears on and cut around the eyes, and that should make a really nice floor rug. So now that the hide's off, what I want to do is go around and peel off as much of this outside fat as possible. This I don't think you would say is a very fat bear, and my main motivation for shooting a bear for the big wild year was to have a really good supply of cooking fat. So it's mid-September right now, but it's basically still very summery. We should be into our fall weather, and it sort of hit today. It was about 10 degrees most of this morning. So maybe the bears just haven't been triggered to start putting on their fat yet, but we are kind of banking on having probably 50 pounds of fat at least. For the big wild year, that would be a pound a week. So I'm not going to get that much fat off of this bear, although I don't think it's unheard of to get 50 pounds of fat off of a big bear. But we're going to work with what we have. And as you know, there are also some raccoons that have been hanging around, and on October the 5th, raccoon season opens on a small game license, and I expect that we will be harvesting at least the 2 raccoons that have been showing up so far. And I might work in a raccoon hunt with my friend Nick, and I might work in a raccoon hunt with the wooded beardsman, but I'm not going to stop baiting bear, so hopefully I have a chance to get another bear. In Ontario, you can harvest 2 bears per year, and see what I can do. I don't know if you can see these. Let me get behind the camera here. Let's see what you're seeing. Yeah. Some of these are just tendons, but some of these are those filarial worms that are a common, almost ubiquitous parasite of black bears in North America. So you find them growing in between the tissue layers. So in between the guts and the wall cavity of the inside of the bear. I also have found them between the skin and the body. And as far as I know, they can't really do anything to you, so I'm just not thinking about them too hard. So I'm going to finish taking all the fat off this bear, and then we'll start quartering. And I've kind of decided to keep it simple and cut everything into fairly large roasts. So a shoulder roast, an arm roast. Cut the ribs off, a hip roast, a sirloin roast, a round roast, and a leg roast. And then any little leftover bits going through the grinder and will be ground meat. Tight workspace here. I guess I could probably disjoint this with a knife, but I'm just going to cut with the saw. I'm just going to cut the lower arms at the elbows. should be able to do that with a knife, but let's start it up with the saw here. Alright, that's the bone part. You've probably noticed I've pretty much done this entire bear with my Grumman trout and bird knife. Works pretty well. Okay, so the lower legs are off, and now what I want to do, if I'm not obstructing the view, is take the shoulder off, and the shoulder is just attached with meat and membrane. So if you go in by the armpit, follow along by the ribs. Okay, there's where the bullet went in at a sharp angle. The bear was quartering away from me, so the bullet went in here, and then most of the bullet stayed inside, but there's a hole on the backside where one bullet fragment went out, but I found pieces of the bullet inside. So once you get into the armpit, you can see where it lies up against the ribs. Cut down towards the neck. And it just comes off there. So the shoulder blade goes almost all the way up to the spine. And there's a shoulder roast. I think I might just wrap that just like that. Fit in the roasting pan nice. But before I do that, I might trim some of this extra fat off for rendering. And do the same thing on the other side. Here's that other shoulder, and there's the end of the, what's that, the humerus. And there's a hole here, so that bullet traveled through the bear from behind in the ribs, went through the heart and the lungs, and then it lodged. I'll probably find it in there against the shoulder bone. So I'm gonna have to cut a big piece of this out, or maybe I'll trim it off here for a clean roast, and then make sure I get rid of all the bullet fragments. So there's quite a bit of chest meat here from where I took the shoulder off. And you can see I took it off of this side of the bear, piece of chest meat up along the bottom of the ribs. So I'm going to do the same with this piece here. Nothing fancy. Just trying to get the meat off the chest by the ribs. And this probably cut up into stewing chunks, or I will put through the grinder for ground. Is the camera pointed too low for seeing that? Oh, it is too. Bring it up a little bit. You probably didn't see that last cut, but I took the side meat off. I guess it would be the bacon on a pig. And I want to get into these, take these two tenderloins out. So they come up a little ways towards the thigh here. I'm definitely leaving that in. A little bit of gas in the background. And if I can get my finger in behind, I think these are attached a little harder than they are in a deer. Might take a little more knife work. Once you cut the top off, then it'll want to fall down. You can let gravity pull it down a bit and then just cut the connective parts up against the inside of the spine. And then you have one tenderloin. So you could cook that as is, or you could cut it into little chops. It's pretty small, so probably cook it as is. And then I'll do the same thing with the other side. Alright, I'm going to cut each side of ribs into 2 pieces. So I scored a line with my knife, and we do this part with the saw. This part's always a little bit awkward, so I'm not going to let you watch me suffer through it. I'm just going to show you approximately what I'm doing. You get the idea. Alright, now I'm just going to turn this around so you can see the inside. So I'm going to cut the ribs out along the spine on both sides. And then this is where that bullet exit is, so I'm going to cut around that. So I have a very meaty set of ribs here. And that's because I've ended up cutting some of the loin out with the ribs. And then I left some side meat on there, so I'm going to get that out. When I was cutting out the bacony parts, go down. Alright. And down along the spine on this side. That's good. And there's another meaty set of ribs, except that the problem with this side is it's got the bullet hole in it. So I'm going to cut on either side of the entry wound. So I'm going to take off a little short rib section here. So that's good. And then I'm going to cut on the other side of that wound. And that's good. Keep that meaty set. And this one, with all the smashed up bone and everything, I'm just going to set aside. First I'm going to trim off this big piece of meat on the outside of the ribs. It's far enough away from the wound. It should be clean. And that can go to grind. Alright, now what I've got left is a neck roast, some ribs to trim off, and then what's left of the back loins, which I think I'm going to leave as loin roasts with the bone in. So I'm going to cut the neck roast off, and then I'm going to cut these rib ends off, and then I'm going to cut this into 3 loin roasts, and then all I'll have left are the 2 quarters, the 2 hindquarters. Okay, first get rid of these little rib ends. And this rib end has the exit wound right there by my finger, so I'm actually just going to throw that piece away. And then have these other little rib bits. Just cut that off with the knife. And I'll trim this for sausage or for grinding. Now, down in the neck I got a couple of loose pieces, and I've also got still a piece of the esophagus. So I'm going to trim out that esophagus. We don't need that. So that's gone. Trim off some of this loose meat for grinding. 1, 2, and then let's make our neck roast cut here. So we'll start it with the knife. I'm going to finish it with the saw, and then let's make our next one here, a loin roast from there to there. And our next loin roast we'll do basically to where the tenderloins ended. So I'll cut through there with the spine, or sorry, with the saw through the spine. So I've got my guide cuts. And then we'll see what we're going to do with our hind quarters. Alright, so we're left with just the 2 hind quarters, and I guess we could do a sirloin roast, and from the knee over a sirloin roast. Then we could cut off here and have a last loin roast or hip roast. Can saw down through the middle, and then we'll have a round roast on the back and a leg at the top. So to take a sirloin roast off, you just find the knee, cut straight down like so till you hit the bone, and then you follow the bone and also keep your knife so it follows this natural line. Might even just cut that line in. And there's a bit of a line on the back side that you can follow too. I know my arm's in the way. But there, you can see I followed the bone down, and there's a seam here and a seam here, so I basically followed that down. And then you can cut your end off square. There's a sirloin roast, just like that. And then you're left with some extra trimming pieces here. Some of it I'll keep on this piece that's going to be another bone-in roast. We'll do a sirloin on the other side, so find the knee, go a little bit below, follow your seams, on that side and that side. Cut your end off square. There's your other sirloin roast, like so. Now what I'm left with is the bone exposed, and everything around the bone is round roast. So I could cut through these and take them off the bone and they'd be boneless round steaks, or I could saw through the bone and cut and I would have bone-in round steaks. But we're going super easy on this, so I'm just going to cut through with the saw, and that's going to be a round roast. I'm going to cut through with the saw, and I'm going to cut across with the saw, and we'll have this big hip roast at the bottom, and then these other roasts. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find my last rib, and I'm going to score a line. Where's my last rib on this side? Score a line around, all the way around, and then I'm cutting through with the saw. These saws are kind of invaluable. So you can do a whole boneless deer if you want and never need a saw, or you can get a saw and do these kinds of bone-in cuts. There's a lot of bone in this cut because it's the pelvis and the hip. And the saw's only cut on the forward stroke. Here's my last loin roast, basically. And then we're going to split down the middle as best we can. It's a little easier to hold on to when it's cooler. It's about 18 degrees outside right now. I don't know what temperature it is in the shop here. I'm a little bit off center. That's all right. Nobody's checking. Two quarters. This one's still got the tail on it. And what did I say I was going to do? Get the knife. Here's the knee where I took off the sirloin. So I'm going to cut around the back to the bone. And that's going to be my round roast. That's a big bone. Woo! There it is, round roast. And I won't show the rest of it, but all I'm going to do now, I'm going to saw off this foot, and I have a little leg roast, and I'm doing the same to this side as I just did to the other side. So I'm finding my cut from my sirloin roast, cut around the back of the leg where all the meat is, and then cut through the bone with the saw. Get a grip on it. There's my other round roast. I think I'm going to set this down on the table and cut the tail off. So they both look the same. And now I just have to cut the feet off. And I guess I was out of the picture for most of that. Once the feet are cut off, then that bear's done. It just needs to be wrapped. And all the little extra bits, trim fat, grind them up, package them as ground meat. That's how you do your bear at home. You can get fancier if you want. You can do different cuts than I did. You can cut steaks. Some people do the whole bear into ground and get it made into sausage. There's lots you can do, but it's not that hard. It just takes time.